and the co-founder of the center. And many of you have been here before. I see some of your pretty faces that I recognize, and it's possible that a few of you are new to the space. We hope that you might be interested in getting on our email list so we can more cool that happen, amazing things that you might need to have happening in your life. As you probably have noticed, we are a gallery. This is our gallerist Dorian Katz's work right here. Art practice makes art pervert. When the lights go up later, I hope you'll look carefully at some of these pictures because they'll make your life better in so many ways. I think you can see that we're a library. We're also an archive. You can't really see that, but it's all stashed in the back. You can see that we have a stage and some stage lights, some chairs. We can put them in circles for classes. We have weddings, birthday parties, the occasional sex event. Perhaps you need to rent the space for some reason. Please talk to us. We would love to speak to you about that. If you have a birthday, a queer anniversary coming up, or any of the things that you might think that you need a sex-positive library with some fun pictures on the wall, with mostly animals to help you celebrate. I'm thinking of all the kinds of things that you don't have another better place to utilize. You might want to know where the restrooms are, over that way in the lobby. We're going to make sure that the mailing list is out on the front counter. If it's not there now, it will be by the time you get up and mill around again. You probably noticed there's refreshments in the back. And the Center for Sex and Culture is a 501c3 nonprofit. We're an all-volunteer entity. We're DIY. We're, hey kids, let's put on a show and let's make sure there's some sex in it. And so in case you don't know us already, we hope we'll be friends for a long time to come. I would also just like to say, by way of introduction to this wonderful evening's events, that I'm going to turn 60 this month, and I cannot think of a time when I thought we needed superheroes more in this damn world. But I've also been doing queer activism since I was 17 years old, and I know very well that there are superheroes all over the place. And I'm really excited to hand the mic over to Boston to talk about Wonder Woman and all the other things. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm going to get off the stage now. Come on up, Boston.
All right, before Boston comes up, I want to introduce him. So, once upon a time, picture it, Sicily, 1942. I was on my way to the comic book store, and it was a release of a new Wonder Woman #1. I had on a pair of blue pants with white stars, red tennis shoes with a white stripe, a red Wonder Woman t-shirt with her insignia emblazed across the chest, yellow wristbands with red stars, and then a yellow headband with a red star on it. And keep in mind, I think that my hair was still long at this time. So you can imagine what that looked like. So I'm bebopping down the street to go to the comic book store. And all of a sudden, this guy comes up next to me and stands at the crosswalk beside me. And he looks over at me. He takes one look and he says, "I know where you're going." And I said, "Yeah, you going there too?" He said, "Sure." We went to the comic book store. It was Boston. We started talking about Wonder Woman, and that was 10 years ago. So now we talk on the phone. Every single month when Wonder Woman comes out, I get a text, "Did you get it yet?" And I know what it's all about. We talk for hours, and Boston calls it our Amazon Bible study. Because we just go on and on. And there have been times when I've looked at the phone and have realized, because thank God I had my headphones in, and have realized, oh my God, it's an hour and a half. I'm like, I have an appointment, I gotta go. And he's like, oh yeah, me too. And that's our friendship. Wonder Woman has bonded us. And I'm really, really excited for this tonight because I've seen, video of his talk. He has so much to contribute, and he has bonded with her in a way that it's incredible and amazing and scholarly, and it's really, really inspiring. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to the man himself, Boston Blake.
dark summer of 1942, the onslaught of the Third Reich continues under the leadership of this indecent and corrupt man. His overtrained and blindly obedient army continues to ravish what is left of free Europe, while Il Duce grasps for his place as this wicked Axis tries to dominate the world. President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Churchill gather the Allies in defense of the free world. The third Axis power plunders across the Pacific. Mankind is being threatened by these despicable villains. The only hope for freedom and democracy
Now is this thing on? Now this thing's on. Wow, thank you all so much for coming out tonight. It is really hard to see you guys. You know who I am because I just got an amazing introduction from Brian. Thank you. I want to know who you are. My first question is, how many of you have seen me give this talk before? Not just me drunk at a bar, like going on, but like actual 1, 2. Oh, cool. How many of you have seen the movie? Yes. How many of you have not seen the movie? Sorry, we're going to spoil some things tonight, but we're going to try to give you some context to actually make it better instead of worse for you. So the first time I gave an earlier version of this talk was 2011, and that was at Wicked Grounds, just up the street, around the corner. Yeah, so you know this spot. Ryan, it is Ryan's spot. Thank you so much for getting the whole thing started. And then I did the talk here, and then I did the talk at CIIS, and then I did the talk at a couple of conventions, and it was a completely different environment. Nobody was talking about Wonder Woman, except me, and I was making up for it. But what was happening was really interesting. When we did the talk here, I was kind of like, oh God, it's this big cavernous room. Is it going to be cold? Is there going to be enough people? And there was about 15 people over here in the corner. And it was great because people were super engaged. Well, the audiences grew and grew and grew. When I finally did the talk at BentCon 2.5 years ago, the only room I saw larger than the Wonder Woman presentation was Anne Rice. And I was kind of like, oh, that's kind of cool. And something was happening, like it was growing in the culture, the appetite was growing. We also had a different president, a different political climate. The whole thing was just kind of a different world. And things have just changed very quickly, and I really believe that Wonder Woman now has a significance that she would not have had a few years ago. And one of the questions that spurred this talk was, why isn't there a Wonder Woman movie? We've had like 22 Batman movies. How many people can he beat up? And so this research project emerged out of that. So what we're going to talk about tonight, we're going to talk about Wonder Woman's roots, what influenced her creator, Dr. Marston. We're going to talk about their family system. We're going to talk about what happened to the character after he died, and how she sort of floated through decades of obscurity until we got the story that we have now. And we're going to talk then, at the very end, we're going to talk about where this project is going with some new information that I've learned about how Wonder Woman and Marston link to the personal development movement and the human potential movement, which is pretty interesting to me. So, does that sound good to everybody?
Yeah.
All right. Now, so Wonder Woman was created in 1941, and she was here to change the conversation in a man-dominated world. Comic books were a relatively new phenomenon. They had emerged out of pulp. Comic books originally were printed on the paper that was left over that newspapers just didn't have enough. No, oh, I'm being corrected here.
No, it's just, I'm not corrected.
Okay. It was a completely underground art form. It was disrespected. It was where the term pulp comes from. And children could go buy comic books for 10 cents an issue. And while Superman was not the first superhero, he took the world by storm in 1938. Batman came along in 1939, and there was a lot of criticism of the violence presented in comic books. What William Moulton Marston would call blood-curdling masculinity. And so today when we talk about that man-ruled world, we call it patriarchy. And so patriarchy has a lot of connotations. People hear it and you can just kind of feel the bristles go up. So we're going to define it. We're going to call it a social system that defends male privilege, characterized by a core value of domination and control in almost every area of human existence. This is a top-down rule mentality. This is Zeus reigning from Olympus. This is the Christian God overlooking everything from above and ruling from above. And patriarchy shows up in our media. It shows up in our conversation in kind of invisible ways. So one of the ways it shows up is our movies. You probably know these guys. They have several movies. The Avengers. And you see these men just aggressively out here stepping into the world. And then you have the Black Widow. Full side movie. Anybody really thought about that before? That this is, the men move forward and she's on display. And patriarchy says you can do this, and nobody thinks about it, it's completely invisible. You can't do this. Because men don't stand like that any more than women do. So Wonder Woman was invented to disrupt patriarchy. And depending on when you were introduced to the character, you might know her from the Super Friends. If you're younger, you might know her from the Justice League Unlimited. If you're in the comics, this is one of Nicola Scott's drawings. I love hers. And if you're anywhere near my age, she looks like Linda Carter.
Yeah.
I can't look at a drawing of Wonder Woman and not convert it to Linda Carter in my head. She has carried the icon so well. And now we have a new Wonder Woman. For the first time in 40 years, there's a Wonder Woman on the screen who looks like this. Those of you who saw the movie, how many of you remember this scene that this is from?
Oh, yeah.
How many of you had a disproportionate emotional reaction to the scene? That kind of blew my mind. Now there are articles written about people's reaction to this scene, saying things like there was something missing from my life and I didn't even know it was missing. Now, I knew it was missing because I've been studying this for my entire life. So let me tell you how we got here. So I fell in love with Wonder Woman when I was 3 years old. I was reaching down to change the knob on the TV, and I stopped, and there was this woman in a red, white, and blue bathing suit swirling a lasso over her head, and she says, "Don't worry, they won't get far." Clang! She pulls them back, and I'm looking at it like, "Mom, what's this?" And she says, "That's Wonder Woman." I'm like, "Oh." This is all perfectly normal to her. I'm like, she says, "Yeah, that's a magic lasso. It makes people tell the truth. Where can I get one?" And she said, "It's not real." And I said, "Well, if it were real, where could I get one?" That would not be the last time I asked that question. I finally got one for 29 cents a yard at Ace Hardware, thanks to my grandmother. So I couldn't read yet, and my parents bought me a Wonder Woman book on tape, and I used it to teach myself to read. And it's really disconcerting when you start saying names like Hippolyta and Aphrodite to your grandparents. It was, I got labeled for coaches, but really I just like books on tape. And then as I got older, I wanted more material, and so I went to the local library. We had a really good library, and my strategy was this: go to the card catalog and find everything that had anything to do with Wonder Woman. And when you do this, you start running into all kinds of other topics. You start running into suffrage. You run into mythology. You run into the Salem witch trials. You run into all kinds. Is this distracting?
Yes. Yeah.
Hold on. Can you hear me without it?
Yes.
All right, screw this. It's driving me crazy too. All right, theater training. So I start trying to figure out where this character came from and really what she was all about. And the world of mythology opened up, and I just became obsessed with what does it mean to have the beauty of Aphrodite, the wisdom of Athena, the strength of Hercules, and the swiftness of Mercury. And I read everything I could. And then when I was in college, I started writing papers on it. And I got really interested in her origins in World War II. And then I got to know this guy, William Moulton Marston. This is the issue. This is Wonder Woman's first issue. It's not her first appearance. Her first appearance was 6 months earlier in All-Star Comics, number 8. Dr. William Moulton Marston was really different from other comic book creators at the time. Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, who created Superman, were young Jewish men from Ohio. Bob Kane grew up very, very poor in Tin Pan Alley. Marston had 3 degrees from Harvard. He was a psychologist, a lawyer, and a philosopher. He also had a really interesting personal life. So, there was a book called Wonder Woman: The Complete History. And every time I say that, I feel a little Hermione Granger-ish. But Les Daniels wrote this book, and he talked about, he interviewed people who knew Marston, including Sheldon Mayer. And he painted this picture of Marston and his family unit, which involved his wife, Elizabeth Holloway Marston, born Sadie Elizabeth Holloway. And she had 3 degrees of her own. She couldn't go to Harvard school. She said those dumb bunnies at Harvard wouldn't take women, so she went to Boston University instead. And she was a career woman, and she had no intention of staying home and raising children. She wanted to have a career and to work. And so they had a domestic partner named Olive Byrne, and Marston had children by both of the women, and Elizabeth continued to work, and Olive, who had been a graduate student of his, who was also trained in psychology, stayed home and raised the children with all of the best child psychology knowledge of the time. And Marston worked not only on his comic book endeavors, but he was a creative in a lot of areas. He was consulting on films, he was doing research, and he was mostly promoting his lie detector. So if you don't know that William Moulton Marston not only created Wonder Woman, he created the systolic blood pressure system used in the polygraph lie detector today. Wow. So he was a busy, busy guy. He also created something, and this is what we're going to talk about at the end of the lecture, but I want to mention it now because it's going to come up. He created something called disk theory. It's D-I-S-C. How many corporate America people do we have? How many have taken a disk assessment test? All right, so a few of you have. The disk assessment test is a modification of his work. So originally, DISC stood for dominance, inducement, compliance, and submission. And it was a circle, it's a disc with 2 crossbars, and you have dominance on the top, submission on the bottom, inducement, and compliance. I'm not going to break all that down as an entire lecture in and of itself, and it's really worth going into, but this is about Wonder Woman. Yeah. So he created Wonder Woman to fight against prejudice, prudery, and man's superiority. You have no idea how much I love that prudery is in there. That drawing is from 1942 by H.G. Peter. So in case you think I'm making anything up or I'm really just reading more into this than is actually there, frankly, Wonder Woman is psychological propaganda for a new type of woman who should, I believe, rule the world, says Dr. Marston. There isn't enough love in the male organism to run this planet peacefully. What woman lacks is the dominance. When he says dominance, he's talking about something very specific. Or self-assertive power, that's what he's talking about, to put over and enforce her love desires. I have given Wonder Woman this dominant force, but have kept her loving, tender, maternal, and feminine in every other way. So this is where we're going to go into DISC a little bit. So he made a division between love on one end of things and appetite on the other. He also talked about things having a physical manifestation and a non-physical manifestation. And so if sex is of the body, love is of the psyche. That's a gross oversimplification. I highly recommend reading Emotions of Normal People, but that's going to be a bit much for now. So now we're going to talk about the original origin of Wonder Woman as it was told in the story. So, and we'll bring it up to the movie later. So, the way it was originally told, the world was in a battle. The battle was between not Zeus and Ares as the movie would have. It was between Aphrodite and Ares, or Mars. It was a battle between love and war. And he equated America with love and Ares with the Nazis and war. And it was this, and the alignment was sending an angel in the form of Wonder Woman to America to guide America toward freedom and as the last safe haven for equality for women. And it's actually written that way in the comic. So Hippolyta, in order to bring love to the world, creates the Amazons. And she carves them from clay. There's no man involved. Hippolyta is their queen. And she gives Hippolyta a magic girdle. And the magic girdle renders the Amazons completely invulnerable as long as Hippolyta wears it. And so Ares sends Hercules to dominate the Amazons. This is his 9th labor, as adjusted by Marston. And where our mythological story of Hercules says, Hercules comes, Hippolyta sees him and is so impressed that she just gives him her girdle. and then Hera intervenes and Hercules ends up killing Hippolyta. And there's a big battle and the Greeks run off into history and the Amazons are kind of gone from that point on. Well, Marston says, wait a minute, there's another side story. What actually happened was that Hippolyta overpowered Hercules in a fair fight. And so, unwilling to accept honest and honorable defeat at the hands of a woman, he decides he will pretend to make love to her, and he will steal the magic girdle. And so he does. And he says, oh, fair Hippolyta, oh, would that I could touch your magic girdle. Oh, I just cannot resist your charm, Hercules. Here you go. And so he imprisons and enslaves and torments the Amazons. Hippolyta prays to Aphrodite for freedom, and Aphrodite grants the Amazons the strength to free themselves. They break their chains, and they use their chains to beat back the Greeks. So this chain imagery, there is so much bondage in Wonder Woman. There are so many chains. Well, there were 2 books that influenced Marston. There are more than that. We're going to talk about 3 of them. But one of the books that influenced Marston was by Margaret Sanger. And Margaret Sanger is the founder of what eventually became Planned Parenthood. And she wrote a book called Woman and the New Race. Another notable thing about Margaret Sanger is she was the aunt of Olive Byrne, the lover of William and Elizabeth. Really strong ties to the suffrage movement. So in this book, Woman and the New Race, the imagery of chains is evoked. It is chains and slavery. And the idea that Margaret Sanger was putting out was that as long as women do not control their own reproductive lives and men have control over their bodies in any way, it is nothing short of sex slavery. And the ultimate sin, her mother had been, I may get this number wrong, but I think she was pregnant 11 times, lost several of the babies, and eventually died in childbirth. And she thought that forcing a woman who could not afford to have children was just the ultimate sin. And so she made it her life's mission to give women access to information and contraception to control their own reproductive lives. The chains metaphor is not just about sex slavery. It goes all the way back to the abolitionists and the imagery used in those in the artwork there. Women became particularly involved in the abolitionist movement. And so when we get to Wonder Woman, start looking at, if you're looking at the chains and bondage, there's always something deeper going on. And we'll look at some of these images in just a second. But it's not just about being tied up and being confined, although that's purposeful. It is, there's more to it. So Hippolyta prays to Aphrodite. She gives the Amazons the strength to free themselves. And then she leads them off to Paradise Island, where they will live as immortals. But on one condition. They must continue to wear the bands that they were chained in as reminders never to fall for the wiles of men again. Never to submit to male authority again. And should they do that, they would well, I get ahead of myself. So on Paradise Island, for thousands and thousands of years, the Amazons chill out, and they just live in perfect love and harmony. But there's one kind of love that is not able to be expressed. There's no motherly love. And Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons, so yearns for a child. She sculpts one from clay under the tutelage of Aphrodite and Athena. And Aphrodite blesses the child with life, names her Diana, and she leaps into life, the little wonder child. Now, this story comes sort of from a book called Herland by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, but it adds a divine element. This is the only story anywhere in literature that I know of that has the divine and the mortal, and that it's only women. There are no men anywhere in this. Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, created the Amazons. She gave them their power. The Amazons sculpt Diana, and you have this lineage of love. And this is where the origin story is so important, and why I have some issues with it being changed over the years. We're going to look at some of those subtle changes and how we finally got to the origin we got in the movie, which, quite frankly, I think works really well for the time. But I want to steer people back to this because I think it's really key. That there is this story of women really running everything, all the way back to a matriarchy and not a patriarchy. So Diana is born. She grows up to be very strong and very fast and very beautiful. And then World War II breaks out in the world of man. And Aphrodite is going to send somebody to help America. A young Amazon must take the captain back to America. She must remain there to fight war and evil. Select your strongest maiden, for she will need all her strength. I obey, O goddess. Her mother says, no, Diana, you cannot enter the contest. I cannot stand to lose you. I cannot stand to have you leave the island and give up your eternal youth and beauty. Well, Diana has fallen in love with the captain, and so she enters this contest masked. She wins it. She wins the right to go to America, where she doesn't exactly fit in. 1941. The conversation about Wonder Woman's costume has gone all the way from 1941 all the way to today, and what's happened. We'll talk about the United Nations in a bit. But her costume gets a lot of flack. Hussy, she has no clothes on. How dare she enjoy being beautiful and sexy? Sour grapes, sister. She took the identity of Diana Prince, and the early Diana Prince identity is just so much fun, because this is a woman from an island where she has been taught nothing but she can, that she's capable, that she has never been said, oh no, you're not as good as you think you are. No, you're actually better than you think you are. You're holding back. And so she comes to this world where women are subservient to men, and so she play acts as one of them. Oh, I love to see you play caveman, Steve. You're so funny when you act masterful. In her Wonder Woman identity, she has a really different attitude. Some girls love to have a man speak to them and make them do things. Do I like it? I don't know, it's sort of thrilling, but isn't it more fun to make the man obey? psychological propaganda for a new type of woman who should rule the world. Wonder Woman was based on Elizabeth and her personality. Elizabeth was pragmatic, she was tough, she was fierce, she was not the kind to suffer fools, and she was a can-do kind of girl, educated at Mount Holyoke, which was just a suffragist training ground. It was an Amazon training ground. And so a mortal woman who's just playing can't, wow, the water is like ice. Well, swim faster and warm yourself up. You started the boat. We can't make it. Can't make what? Excuses? Hold on tight. Let's go. A woman that she's rescued from an abusive husband, really abusive husband. Submitting to a cruel husband's domination has ruined my life, but what can a weak girl do? Get strong. Earn your own living. Join the lax or the waves and fight for your country. Remember, the better you can fight, the less you'll have to. This is quintessential Wonder Woman. Get strong, get educated. And this Wonder Woman's answer a lot of times is enter the workforce. Get a job. If you can pay your own way, you're not reliant on men. This was the access, still is, the access out of what Steiner calls sex slavery. Now, it turns out that Diana got bound and tied up a lot when she left the island, but she was prepared for it. Because on Paradise Island, where they played lots of binding games, they considered this the safest way to tie a girl's arms. Kids try this at home. And in her Diana Prince identity, she ended up in some interesting situations. Yes, I'm going to chain you like this every time I go out. How thrilling! I see you're chaining me to a cook stove. What a perfect caveman idea. So remember when I talked about the symbolism of chains? This is the kind of thing we're talking about. This is, do I really need to explain this? Good. Now, there's an aspect of Wonder Woman, it's kind of like a Bugs Bunny cartoon, or like the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote, but instead of Wile E. Coyote like ending up over the ravine and not falling, and he looks down and then he falls, it's just ropes coming out of nowhere, and like all of the different ways she gets bound and tied up, just constantly getting tied up and breaking and tied up and breaking, constantly being constrained and restricted so that we can see her break free. And this was a point of contention. There were letters written to DC Comics. They were super not into this. The argument was that it seemed sadistic, and Marston said, no. I have really gone out of my way to make sure that there is no sadism anywhere in these books. This is why I go to bondage, because I can create a sense of peril without people inflicting pain, and I can get away from sadism in the comics. And so the advisory board that DC Comics had said, oh, no, that's right, there's no real sadism here. But here's a list of other ways that you can bind them, and it doesn't have to be chains. And he said, don't worry, I've got my own. Like, roll her in that asbestos sheet and put her in the mold of melted gold. Because you might do that. But she was prepared. She had been practicing. Bind me as tight as you can, girls, with the biggest ropes and chains you can find. We are, princess, even you can't escape these bonds. You see, girls, it's easy to break bonds if you know you can. We're not just talking about physical bonds, we're talking about mental bonds. What are you in bondage to? What holds you back? What thoughts are keeping you locked in? What do you believe? Why did they bind me with such small chains? It's an insult. It's the best you got? I can break anything you can throw at me. Unless. So there's a lot of talk about Marston, whether it was actually a fetish of his or whether it's just in there as the symbolism. I can't say unequivocally what his fantasy life was, but I can say that in Wonder Woman #6 he was very, very specific. Where there's a book called by Tim Hanley called Wonder Woman Unbound, And he talks about this scene. This is the famous brank, a leather mask worn by women prisoners in the Saint Lazare prison, France. It covers the entire face and muffles a prisoner's voice. So information about this appeared in an article not too long, like that Marston probably would have read. And this, the wide iron collar around Wonder Woman's neck, comes from Tibet. It prevents a prisoner from bending his head. And the Greek manacle clamps the ankles firmly together. Being very specific. So we're going to muzzle her. We're going to make sure she can't move her neck. And we're going to keep her hands behind her back with sacred ancient artifacts of bondage. And then you get this panel, which is just amazing. 1942, 43. And he was trying to create what he called captivation emotion. Today we call it stickiness in terms of websites or apps. You know, how do you keep eyeballs on the page and how do you keep them coming back? Well, this is a good way to do it. But Wonder Woman had a commentary on it. How tiresome, I spend all my time getting tied up. And no matter what people throw at her, she's still not impressed with the In order to really hold her down, there was a way. There was a way. Daughter, if any man welds chains to your bracelets, we will become weak as we Amazons were when we served Hercules and his Greeks. Because, you know, somebody might think to do that to you. I've got a great idea. Let's weld chains onto her bracelets. It's a great idea. It happened a lot. People kept just coming up with this idea over and over again. And in this first story, she forgets what she's been taught so that we all get to learn the lesson as readers. But after this story is told, when the bracelet chaining would happen, it's always because she has been rendered unconscious or because she is somehow blindfolded and distracted. So we're really talking about, again, the chains of patriarchy, the chains of male domination. If you check out, you can buy into other people's worldview. And there was a real call to little girls to say, wake up, pay attention, keep control of your power. And then there's what happens if the bracelets are removed. I'm not weak, I'm too strong. The bracelets bound my strength to good purpose. Now I'm completely uncontrolled. I'm free to destroy like a man. These bracelets were called the bracelets of submission. And they were emblematic of the Amazon's submission to Aphrodite. They specifically kept Aphrodite above and man below, and the Amazons somewhere in between. And without the bracelets, without this symbolic reminder, they're free to dominate and destroy just like a man. So Wonder Woman goes into a berserker rage. The only way to subdue her is with the magic lasso of Aphrodite. Oh, easy, darling. It's your Paula. Stop this mad orgy of strength. Relax, I command you. Oh, I feel relaxed. Thank Aphrodite. The very first thing we need to do is get bound again. It's wonderful. To feel my strength bound again. Power without self-control tears a girl to pieces. Now we're going to talk about that lasso. So whether you know the lasso of Hestia from the movie, most of us think of it as the lasso of truth. Well, that's not really where it started. It was not part of Wonder Woman's original design. It showed up 6 months later. And before the lasso was invented, Wonder Woman had to use other means to get her answers. Sometimes she used Marston's lie detector. Lila's blood pressure jumped 50 millimeters. She's lying about that envelope. Somehow it just doesn't have the same flavor, and then you've got to write a story about how you end up with a nurse giving a lie detector test. It's just easier to lasso somebody. The lasso was not just for eliciting information. Originally, it compelled submission in whoever was bound by it. So it talked about dominance and submission being on this axis. So it takes somebody's dominance from the top all the way to nothing. So that now she can use what Marston called, he called it symbolic of woman's love allure. Of the tactics and strategies and tools that all women have and use to get their needs met, to get their questions answered, to get what they want. The lasso is a non-violent way of eliciting this information and eliciting behavior. So, if you're lassoed, you must obey my commands. Before this, she had to get answers however she could, even if that was waterboarding. And somehow waterboarding woman just doesn't quite feel like Wonder Woman. Or this was the original Dr. Poison with the mask removed. Give us the antidote for reversal, or I will tear this garment off of you and march you barefoot to Washington. I'm just assuming they couldn't say naked, but she's not going for her shoes. So where did the lasso come from? So 6 months after Wonder Woman's created, and has having adventures in man's world, she's called back to Paradise Island, where the goddesses have a gift for her. This magic lasso was made for you at the goddess's command. What? It's made of chain. How marvelous. The page that this is taken from mentions that it is made from chain 3 times on one page. Apparently this is really important information. So the lasso is pulled, the links pulled from Hippolyta's magic girdle, fashioned into a lasso that now commands obedience, compels obedience. Having proved thyself bound by love and wisdom, we give thee power to control others. Whomsoever thy magic lasso binds must obey thee. So now we have Wonder Woman with the ability to literally bind people with chains of love that make them do her bidding. This is way better than waterboarding and more visually interesting. With this great gift, I can change human character. I can make bad men good and weak women strong, but I can't use it on Diana Prince. She will have to go on mooning over Steve Trevor. Well, he goes on mooning over Wonder Woman because you need a love triangle. But she's really commenting on what an epic responsibility this is, which sometimes she fails at. Get down on your knees before that girl who was fool enough to love you and loosen her bonds with your teeth like the cur you are. Something compels me to obey. Psychological propaganda for a new type of woman who should rule the world. Girls, try this at home. Now, when Wonder Woman went out into man's world, the first thing she did was create a family. And her best friend was Etta Candy. Yay, Etta Candy! She ruled over the Beta Lambda sorority. I'm not making this up. Where she used dominance and submission, humiliation, whatever it took to get her girls to perform at the top level, just like Amazon training. But college. Sometimes they would use it as punishment for the people they captured. Let's give her the Hitler cure. Now, in the next panel that I was scrambling and I couldn't get it before we started. In the next panel, Wonder Woman bursts in and says, "I did not tell you to torture that girl." And she says, "Oh no, they didn't hurt me. They just humiliated me so that I would see the error of my ways." That was one version of the DS relationships. Now pretty soon, Wonder Woman starts to look like a sort of practical guide to best practices in dominance and submission. When you go to the planet Mars, where Mars rules supreme and all women are enslaved, she is faced with she's given one of Mars' slaves as her house girl. "Here's your whip, mistress. I haven't had my daily beating." So, while that's really over the top, we know we know, and sometimes we've been these people who really think that we deserve the punishment that's being dished out to us, and you can get really, really used to that. And this issue starts to really draw this group of women who simply lost any sense of identity outside of their men and outside of their men's domination. This is what happens when Mars rules the world. Cautionary tale. Wonder Woman number 2, worth reading. Then there's Baroness Paula von Gunther. Paula's an amazing character. The first time we meet her, she's sort of running this finishing school for girls from hell. Step higher, point your toes down, back straight. This teaches you girls discipline. Tomorrow you will join their ranks. Won't I have fun? The relationship between Paula and her slave girls gets really interesting. They're terrified of her. They think that every encounter with her could be their last because she's using them to test her scientific devices. They also have this kind of strange loyalty to her. She is their mistress, and they may not love her, but they fear her and they obey her. I am the slave of the Baroness. She is my mistress. She commands, I obey. Poor girl. She's been drugged and hypnotized. How clever! She can appreciate the tactic. Not everyone has a magic lasso. I am a kinder mistress. I am stronger than Baroness Paula. I will break your chains. You could. I will no longer be enslaved. So, not only is she going to free this girl, but she really wants to take over as the dom. And that is the theme. So, Wonder Woman eventually frees these slave girls from Paula and takes them to Paradise Island and entrusts them to her best friend Mala, who's in charge of re-education. It's called Reform Island or Transformation Island, depending on where which issue you're reading. Now, something really interesting about this, Marston did a lot of work in prisons and wrote a lot about reimagining the prison system. He saw the brutality and the abuse happening in prisons as something that was not just horrible for the prisoners, but horrible for society. It was completely ineffective, and it seems really obvious. It's great to know that he was talking about this in the 1930s. So he imagined a different kind of prison, where people were taught to rebuild themselves. If I'm your mistress, I'll make you strong and fearless like Amazon girls. No fetters during athletics, unlock your chains and come swimming with me. Well, these girls are not used to freedom. We'll kill you. You can't free us. We'll die rather than be free. They're fighting for women's bondage, the Hitler principle, that women must remain men's slaves. Just a reminder that we're still in World War II, and this is the paradigm that's set up. Women, freedom, America, Hitler, Nazis, submission, not submission, compliance and imprisonment. And women should be slaves. I can't understand these girls, says Mala. Oh, you could, if you knew woman in the man-ruled world. They want to be slaves because they're afraid to be free and compete with men. Now, girls want to be slaves. There's no harm in that. The bad thing for them is submitting to a master or to an evil mistress like Paula. Now, the wording in there, it's not a good master or a good mistress, it's any master. Women don't submit to men, it's a bad idea. Or an evil mistress like Paula. A good mistress could do wonders with them. Wonder who she has in mind. And so these Amazons are trained using their chains, using their fetters, using the things that have held them back to propel their strength forward. Lifting the ball and chain, blocking the swords with their bracelets. And Paula herself, who was a fantastic villain, and Marston decided to explain why this brilliant woman, who was Wonder Woman's equal in terms of strategy and just general cleverness, was acting like such a bitch. Well, it turns out that Hitler had imprisoned Paula's daughter. And this is another theme that we start seeing in Marston's books, where love is weaponized, where somebody's love is recognized as a prime motivator, and people will do anything to protect that love, the love of a child, the love of a parent. One of the best ways to get somebody to obey you is to threaten someone they love. And so Wonder Woman goes and breaks Goethe out of a Nazi prison, and this is, oh God, Wonder Woman number 3. It still brings tears to my eyes because she goes into this Nazi prison where there are these children and their comments on, oh my God, they beat you. Look at your bruises. You haven't been fed. And this is a comic book being given to children in 1942, 1943. Really, really powerful imagery in there. And so now with her daughter back, Paula supplicates herself to Diana. From this moment on, I belong to you. I pledge my life to your service. No, 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 no. To the service of Aphrodite. Love, beauty, and justice. And now we have Diana as we now have this lineage. There's a master-slave, a mistress-slave relationship going on between Paula and Diana for the rest of Marston's run. And Paula becomes her best friend and ally. This becomes really problematic for future writers because it's very, very Wonder Woman to reform your enemies. But man, a good villain is tough to write. So it's a tricky balance. But this story was really, really moving and really exemplified the love that was so emblematic of the book. I've tied myself with the magic lasso and now command you, Diana, Prince Wonder Woman, never to use your influence over Paula for your own selfish purposes or to make yourself feel smart. It's a tremendous responsibility to shape another's life, and I must do it right. Psychological propaganda for a new type of woman who should rule the world. Girls, try this at home. Very, very briefly, we're going to visit the Christmas issue, 1942. Wonder Woman goes back to Paradise Island and brings presents. Oh, wait, it's a spanker. Tennis racket, don't be silly. Oh, it doesn't hurt. It's a sissy spanker from the man's world. And so, to celebrate their Christmas, which they call Diana's Day, which celebrates the solstice, essentially, the Amazons dress up as does, and Wonder Woman chases them through the woods with a bow and a suction cup arrow, and she shoots them down, and she picks them up, and the winner of the not just Wonder Woman, but other Amazons are chasing them, and the one who can catch the most and carry them all to the finish line wins the contest. But you can't just put them down, you've got to hang them on hooks first. I'm at a loss. I love this issue because I've been trying to do Jungian analysis on it. I'm just it's amazing. And we're not done yet. Okay, you've been hooked, you've been cut out, and now we're just going to bake you into a pie. Are we really going to eat each other? No, we're going to make them dance. And this is why I love William Moulton Marston. These books are completely bonkers and wonderful. Now, let's back up just a second. Okay, so in 1947, William Moulton Marston died of cancer. And he was going to go. If it wasn't cancer that got him, it was going to be polio. And so Elizabeth marched herself down to DC Comics and said, I want to take over Wonder Woman. And they said, nah, we're going to give it to this guy, Robert Kanigher. And Robert Kanigher had been not allowed to write for Wonder Woman very specifically. And he presented some scripts to MC Gaines, who was the publisher at the time, and Gaines just said, no, I'm sorry, I'm getting that wrong. It's not MC Gaines, it was Sheldon Mayer. Sheldon Mayer said, no, this is not Wonder Woman. Well, Marston dies, Kanigher gets Wonder Woman, stays on it for years. He reimagines the origin of the Amazons. This is where that origin you start to see how important it is. This time, Wonder Woman is not the product of divine love. She is the child of an Amazon queen and a king, and the men have all gone to war, and then they've all died. And when we meet Hippolyta, oh, all the men wiped out in the wars, Amazon warrior queen says. And woe is us, we are alone now. Well, rather than go out and marry again, they all take off for Paradise Island, where they can just not have to worry about getting remarried, because that would be a bad idea. We move, Diana then is visited by the gods, and this is where we start to get more modern origins, where I call it the Sleeping Beauty origin, where she's blessed by the gods and goddesses with her superpowers. It's no longer the result of fierce Amazon training. It's actually divinely inspired, which admittedly works better for our modern stories where you're pushing around planets instead of just deflecting bullets. But you start to lose this inner fire, this power that women have within. And I say women, I want to be clear. Of course men have this too. We just don't question it. Women are taught not to really own that. So this time in the contest, instead of Wonder Woman entering in disguise to fool her mother, the big concern is that Hippolyta, rather than be protective of her daughter, is going to show terrific favoritism. And so instead of disguising herself, she has all of the other Amazons disguise themselves as her. Which is just this bizarre ego trip. And this is a theme that Kanigher uses a lot, where now the World War II is over, there are no Nazis to fight, superheroes are falling from favor, and a book has been released called Seduction of the Innocent by Friedrich Wertham. And Friedrich Wertham hated comic books. He said that comic books were destroying America's youth. Batman and Robin were gay. Wonder Woman was a lesbian. And children were being bombarded with terrible messaging. I'm not saying he was wrong in his evaluations. I am saying he was wrong in his opinion. So, and then Wonder Woman is given her first mission. Rather than go stop the god of war, Diana, you will have to perform wonders indeed in man's world. For your first mission is to donate a summer camp to the children's charities. It'll cost $1 million. $1 million? But mother, you know I don't have any money. By Pallas Athena's command, you are to turn this penny into $1 million in 24 hours. That's Wonder Woman's new origin story. Well, it didn't stick. But Wonder Woman then has major challenges in the world. Beyond becoming a capitalist genius, she has to choose between boyfriends. It didn't stick. So they went back. So this wasn't working, and Kanigher goes back and he goes, "Oh, well, let's revisit this World War II style. Let's retell the story." And so she does, or he does. But he makes a few really interesting and bizarre changes. This is where the subtleties of Wonder Woman's origin are really great. And all right, Hippolyta is a prisoner of Hercules. She prays to Aphrodite for release. You may break your chains, but only if you can force a man to undo the bonds that a man has placed on you. Thank you, generous Aphrodite. I'm going to go find a man and whore myself to him. So she throws herself on his great phallic sword. Thank Aphrodite, a man broke open my chains, I am free. The messaging is so different. Doesn't matter what the art style is. You're getting this message that it's your power, your freedom, your life is still in the hands of a man. Kanigher. So this next section we're going to go through, we're going to look through a series of covers. Kanigher edited Wonder Woman until the 1960s, and with different degrees of success. Finally, in 1968, 69, Wonder Woman is depowered. And they decide to do this Emma Peel 1970s spy thing, where Wonder Woman goes and she relinquishes her Amazon powers, and she becomes the student of, and I swear I am not making this up, a blind Chinese man named I Ching. Hashtag Orientalism. And so she goes through these adventures where she is an emotional basket case, moving from man to man. Steve Trevor dies several times. Finally, we get all the way to the Women's Lib issue. I invite you to take a really good look at the cover of the Women's Lib issue, where you have a pack of wild dogs chasing Diana's boobs toward the other set of boobs. Take it easy, Kathy. We're over. And inside that classic issue, well, I'm all for equal wages too, but I'm not a joiner. I wouldn't fit in with your group. in most cases, I don't even like women. Denny O'Neil apologized for this issue later, and as well he should have. He said he just didn't get her. He was right. So this issue was a two-parter, and it never got finished because Gloria Steinem got involved. So during this time, Gloria Steinem is in the process of founding Ms. Magazine. They have this meeting of all the women who are putting this magazine together, and they're trying to decide what they're going to put on the cover. And they unanimously agree it's going to be Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman had affected them all so much as children. She had been this beacon through their lives, and they were ready to, they wanted to do this thing. So they reach out to DC Comics, and they start reading the comics to find out what's going on in her story right now. And they find this. Gloria was not a happy woman. Now, I've heard different versions of this story, but this is my favorite. And I don't want to claim this is the honest to God truth, but it's a great story. And that is that in the issue of Ms. Magazine, they published an announcement that in 1972, Wonder Woman would be returning to her red, white, and blue garb, Amazon again, and with all of her powers restored. But that was the first time that DC Comics had heard about it. I want that to be true so much. And this is that cover. I love this cover so much. So you've got the Vietnam War on one side, you've got downtown America on the other side, and Wonder Woman with this concerned, desperate look on her face, holding one city above, and this icon of feminism standing between war and an orderly society. And this is a time where women are once again really, really fighting. When we think of women's suffrage all those years ago, I don't know about you, but my introduction to women's suffrage was Mary Poppins. And so it took me a long time to get past the image of Mrs. Banks singing and dancing with that banner on her chest, having a jolly old time. Women were tortured, they were beaten, they were raped, they fought with their lives for the right to vote. The fight didn't stop. It just kind of changed forms. Women getting it, we still haven't passed the Equal Rights Amendment. We're not there. The 1970s was the next generation of women who had grown up with moms who had been exposed to Wonder Woman. These ideas had been implanted in them, and they grew. These women were taught that they could be and do anything. And they fought. I put that in there because it gives me chills. Now, Friedrich Wertham had said that Wonder Woman inspired lesbianism, but it's not true. He inspired drag queens. Because what the hell is Pride Month without Wonder Woman drag queens? It is really amazing, not beyond the feminist world and beyond the world of women, what Wonder Woman has come to mean to queer people, to gay men. When the internet was young, and I was younger, I remember the AOL chat rooms that you could stay on for like 5 minutes at a time before your phone dropped. And it was the first time I had been this kid studying Wonder Woman my whole life. And there was nobody to talk to about it in Pauls Valley, Oklahoma. Who did that?
That's the right response.
And then I found this Wonder Woman chat room, and there were like 50 people in it. And they all knew what I knew. They had all studied Wonder Woman the way I had studied Wonder Woman. They had become obsessed with her. And they were also all gay. Which was really trippy, because I didn't know I was, and wouldn't for a long, long time. But it was so amazing to be able to have these conversations for the first time ever. And I have to think there is something about Wonder Woman that speaks to not just women, but to gay men, to people of color, and I don't want to make that assumption, white man up here, but something about any group that has been taught that they are less than as a group, that they should be quiet as a group, that somehow they need to keep inside them what they really want to express. Wonder Woman is the embodiment of that. And so she plays Yeoman Diana Prince until she spins around into her fabulous covers and kicks ass. And we all love to dress well. And we all love to kick some ass in our lives. And we really, really hate it when people think they are better than we are just because of the group that they belong to. They're wrong. Now we're going to look at some covers. We're going to move really fast through this because I'm most interested in the Q&A. But these are covers that were, if you're not comic book readers or you weren't in the 80s, the way buying comics works is you go into a comic shop and you've got all these covers lined up and you look at what you want to buy and the cover grabs your eye like a poster. So how do you sell the archetype of the empowered feminine? I've had my fill. I quit. Huh? Somebody forgot the safe word? Hold up. I got these out of order. We'll get to that in a second. In 1986, George Perez came along and completely retooled Wonder Woman as part of a company-wide revamp of the DC Comics heroes. This is the birth of the modern-day Wonder Woman the way we know her, where she's not so much military, she's an Amazon warrior, and where she wields swords and axes. The bracelet's weakness is gone because it really registered as sexist. If anybody's writing it except Marston, it's really, really misogynistic. This Wonder Woman says, so long as life remains, there's always hope. And so long as there is hope, there can be victory. There's lots of wonderful lines. George Perez gave me my Wonder Woman. This is when I got to really know her. She became literally a spiritual figure for me. His run didn't last. Well, it lasted 5 years, and then somebody else took over. And this is how he sold the image of the empowered feminine. Yeah. Her bank accounts had been frozen, she had been off planet for a while, and apparently nobody remembered who she was, and this is what she was qualified to do. Thank you. Oh, then there's this. Yeah, she's bound. She's not having fun this time. She's not in control. How do you sell the empowered feminine? You're walking through a comic book shop, you're 12 years old, and this is on the shelves. Girl fight with extra crotch. That was Wonder Woman's biker outfit that lasted for a while. I don't know why that didn't stick. This is where she tried to stand up to Hercules, the man who raped her mom. How do you sell the empowered feminine? This was a period of time, this story got a lot of attention. This was part of another company-wide effort by DC Comics to raise interest. And what happens is Wonder Woman is faced with the choice to let a man control Superman and use him to destroy the whole world, or kill him. She binds him in the magic lasso, and she says, how do I stop you? And he says, kill me. And she goes, and then it is broadcast over all of the televisions, and everybody sees this happen. And Wonder Woman is again, labeled a monster. Apparently everybody's forgotten everything good that she's ever done for them. Nobody knows what that's like. Where suddenly you make one mistake, Or is it a mistake? You have Batman and Superman turn on you and say, oh my God, you broke the no-killing rule. There's another story, a behind-the-scenes story that I heard from one of the writers when I gave this talk at BenCon, and he said there was a conversation at DC Comics, and I believe it was Greg Rucka, who said, well, Batman's objection should be that if this world can do this to Diana, then what chance do the rest of us have? And DC editorial said, no, she broke the no-killing rule. He's mad. Oh, I forgot this was in there. When I started this, the question was, where's the Wonder Woman movie? Even the comic book was asking that question. They tried to do a TV series with Adrian Palicki. It didn't fly. This was a run where they tried another costume, and in this run she was punctured no fewer than 12 times by various phallic objects. She just sucked at bullets and bracelets during this run. And now we have the beginnings of the origins of the movie. This is a run by Brian Azzarello, where he reimagined the Amazons. Instead of being the immortal product of goddesses' love, they were instead women who had shunned mankind, going off to live on an island, and every 33 years they would go and have sex with sailors and have children by them, and they would kill them. And Diana herself was the product of an affair with Zeus. So instead of her power coming from the immortal love of an ancient primordial goddess, her power came from Daddy. You can see why this is problematic to the origin when we start looking at where things started. Now, when you're constructing an origin for a movie that has to play all around the world, and you are trying to get an audience, you're trying to make $435 million in 12 days, which just happened. Sometimes you have to make some changes, because you've got to be able to speak to patriarchal society. So I'm cool with it. If it gets people to read Wonder Woman, if it gets people to get curious about where she came from, if it gets girls to be curious, to look at these things and to look at the history of their own empowerment in the culture. Wonder Woman is this wonderful track all the way through these empowerment phases. In 2012, Sandra Fluke testified before Congress, a special hearing, while these men decided on women's access to birth control through insurance companies. And her arguments were that birth control is not just prescribed as birth control, that there are all kinds of other medical conditions that it's necessary for. And then Rush Limbaugh got on television and for 3 days said the most horrible misogynistic things. She has so much sex that she wants us to pay for her birth control. And nobody punched him, which I thought was really unfortunate. He was able to get away with this for 3 days. Now eventually he lost his advertisers and he eventually went off the air. But this is what happens when Wonder Woman is not part of the conversation. I don't mean the character, I mean the archetype. When we don't have someone holding down that energy, saying, women, you matter too, and in this situation you matter most. That's what happens when Wonder Woman goes to sleep. Where was the movie then? Ms. Magazine celebrated 40 years. There's a new cover with Wonder Woman again. And while the face of feminism has changed, mostly it just seems kind of blank. At least her face. But we do have the move into multiculturalism. We see some representation. And we also see that the focus is more on action in Washington instead of on a global scale. A couple of years ago, Grant Morrison wrote, oh no, it was last year. Boy, time moves fast. Grant Morrison wrote Earth One. This was a milestone, and while you might look at this cover and you might see something problematic or you might see something really hot, Grant Morrison went back and asked, what makes Wonder Woman so special? What makes Wonder Woman Wonder Woman? And he really embraced the bondage and submission as access to power, submitting to what is, not fighting when you don't have to. And he also made Wonder Woman a lesbian, which was amazing because it's the most obvious thing in the world. I should say bisexual, but coming from an island of lesbians where lesbian sex was depicted, relationships were depicted, the architecture was shaped. It was more after it was domes and vessels and tanks. There was only one tower. It was the phallic imagery was notably absent. And it was a big deal because all of a sudden it broke the seal where other writers could write Wonder Woman as gay and bisexual. And that's how she is perceived, how she's portrayed now in the comics today. This had not happened when I started giving this talk, so I was making a lot of noise about it, and I love that I don't have to. Recently, Wonder Woman went through a rebirth with Greg Rucka. This art is by Nicholas Scott. Nicholas Scott notably also did the United Nations campaign when Wonder Woman was intended to be an honorary ambassador to the youth, to the United Nations. And at that event, Linda Carter spoke, and Christy Marston, Dr. Marston's granddaughter, attended, and Gal Gadot was there. And a group of feminists turned their back, and in unity with real feminism, they basically said they didn't like what she wore, and that she was sexualized, and she was an inappropriate ambassador. And by the way, there were real women who could fulfill this job that was always used. It was always filled by, I don't know, one was Angry Birds, and before that it was Barbie because she's so feminist. But Wonder Woman was one step too far, and they canceled the campaign. And so I'm going to finish this up with this talk from that United Nations event by Linda Carter, and then we're going to open this for a Q&A. And thank you so much for your attention this far.
I see it in the tears that fall from the eyes of the women. There lies within each of us Wonder Woman. She is real. Wonder Woman helps bring out the inner strength every woman has. We are all inclusive. That is who women are. We are stronger together. We are half the world. We have a voice. We are the mothers of all mankind. We are the mothers of all mankind. We can be smart and beautiful and strong and wise and kind and brave. We believe in fair play and fair pay and playing by the rules. We come in all shapes and sizes. We are mothers and sisters and daughters and grandmothers and great-grandmothers. We are black and brown and white and red and yellow. We are tall and short and thick and thin. We are blondes and brunettes and gingers and salt and peppers. So Wonder Woman lives, do not doubt it. She lives in every woman. You can be anything. I see these beautiful faces. Learn, know, be everything that you dream. Because unless you dream it can't be done. You gotta dream it first.
One thing to take out of that video is that line, we are the mothers of all mankind. That was Margaret Sanger's statement. That was what Elizabeth Holloway Marston believed. Every soldier, every doctor, everybody who's ever done anything, women are the ones who control the population. They do, unless they let somebody else. So thank you very, very much.
Give us the Boston Blake.
Q&A. This is absolutely my favorite part because otherwise I'm just up here talking. And I also want to fulfill on one more promise that where this project is going is into the realm of personal development, because what I've learned fairly recently is that the work of Dr. William Moulton Marston is what influenced the creation of a system called psychocybernetics. Psychocybernetics led to NLP. NLP created EST, which is now, or informed Werner Erhard, who founded EST, which is recently incarnated as Landmark Education. Every bit of life coaching, personal development, anything that you are seeing in corporate training, most of it has its roots in William Moulton Marston's work. And he's almost never, ever credited, probably because he was such a problematic figure at the time. And so the next piece is to look at Wonder Woman comics through that lens, and how we can look at her stories as examples of personal development psychology. So, who got questions?
So I saw the movie, loved it, but it really bothered me that they mixed the mythologies.
Yeah.
The Greeks and the Romans, and I'd rather that they had just created something entirely different or less well-known, I don't know, Sumerian or something. Do you have any comment on why they might have done that?
Well, because the story, the Greek mythology does go all the way back to the origin story of Wonder Woman. It is part of the source material. It would be, for her fandom and the noise that her fans make, it would not have worked to anything that was not Greek. Her name being Diana is really where that starts to get tricky, because that's a Roman name. It hadn't come around yet. But it's funny. I have the opposite argument. I would have preferred they go more Greek and keep true to that. But I think they really did it so that Christians and other monotheists could hang God versus the devil on it, where you've got Zeus versus Ares. That's just something that it's coded into our culture and people can understand it, and they can understand it around the world. What's that?
Instead of Artemis, Apollo.
Yeah. Keep in mind, that movie was 2.5 hours long. It moved fast, but imagine going in and explaining Greek mythology just to set the stage. You and I know this, a lot of people do, but that movie's been seen by millions and millions and millions of people.
So they set the movie, you're still learning the movie, they set the movie back in World War I. I want to know your thoughts about that shift from the material to World War I.
I was so against it until I saw it. I really was, but I think it was I think it was inspired. It was, one of the things that's great about it is, in 1919, first of all, you could sort of believe that the world hadn't been mapped yet, that there could be this island out there where this was going on. There also wasn't the massive discrepancy in technology, and so people were still sailing. A Bronze Age culture wasn't just totally unrelatable. I think that it also worked well on the level that women didn't have the vote yet. For all of the scenes where Diana's being constantly mansplained to, walking into a room and like, what's she doing here? Like that was really that's how that was. But World War II, having women's secretaries, and in the United States, women were already starting to do all of these jobs, which was great because this thing's already underway. But in 1919, it wasn't even an idea yet. So I thought it worked really, really well. And now? Oh.
Have you explored Marston's sex life, and can you say anything about it?
So, the truth is, anything I say is we really don't have any actual evidence. Everything is hearsay. Les Daniels put some stuff out there. He made some assumptions. I sat down and had a conversation with Moulton Marston in LA some years ago. It was really awkward to ask somebody about their sex life. I did. What I do, one thing that was going on, so there was every Tuesday night for 3 years, they were going to a book club? I really hope she's going to let me read those journals. But there was a book that came out in 2014 called The Secret History of Wonder Woman. And it was written by Jill Lepore. And I cannot tell you how much I hate that book. It took a narrative that had been spun by a woman, not the Margaret Sanger that we know, but another generation, Margaret Sanger Marston, who married Marston's son Don. And she did not like the Marston family and had an axe to grind and was really sort of horrified by their whole family system. That she also, and she, by the way, never met William Marston. He had long since died before she was around. And she told the story of a walk according to the story, Elizabeth said, I went on this walk. Marston was going to bring, William wanted to bring this other woman into our bedroom, and I decided, I realized that I had a choice to make, and so I said yes, but she'll raise the kids and I'll have my career. That does not fit with any other story about Elizabeth at all. According to Christie's words, she'd have had him under a bus. Like, that was not, she didn't need him, she worked on her own, she would have been fine. That's not a decision she would have had to make. It also is highly unlikely that this conversation, I can't say this unequivocally, if this conversation happened, I would be really surprised. But Lepore wrote this and a lot of other things as factual. And so there's also a play that came out called Lasso of Truth that was at the Marin Theater Company, where they sort of portrayed the sex life. It was all fiction. It was, and I had a conversation with them about that. Like, oh no, we took this story, we built something out of it. This is not a biography. We don't know anything about their sex life. There's no record. They never taught it. They also never. They never argued about it. They never refuted anything. And Marston wrote several self-help books, and one of them was called Try Living. The second one was Try Living, and I love the very end of this book. His 3 pillars of happiness are live, love, and laugh. Life, love, and laughter. And toward the end of it, he says, live the life that makes you happy. Do what brings you joy. And Wonder Woman's taken on this idea, this goddess of truth thing. Marston was like, look, if you being happy is going to cause strife in the world around you, lie. Not unnecessarily, but don't create, but live, don't get hurt. Don't martyr yourself. He tells the story of Galileo. All right, no, the earth does not revolve around the sun. Earth does not revolve around the sun. We'd all like to think Galileo fought the good fight. No, he said science will catch up. Marston just didn't talk about it. It wasn't up there. We know that they had a happy family. We know that he liked to fight at work, and we know that everyone in the family had lots of love. Nobody refutes that. There was plenty of love to go around. Is what all of the kids and grandkids have said. So no, I don't know anything about that.
In the last couple of decades, writers have hooked up Wonder Woman with Bruce Wayne, with Superman. See Trevor's around sometimes, and other times she's not with anyone. Why do you think the writers keep trying to feel like she has to be with somebody?
Oh. There are 2 answers to that question. So the first is, love is absolutely fundamental to Wonder Woman, and romantic love is absolutely a human expression of love. It's such an important one. And it goes all the way back to the original origin where Steve crash lands. And yes, it's a little weird that she falls in love with the first man she sees and all that. But, yeah. And then in the 1980s, when George Perez relaunched Wonder Woman, he made a creative decision to make Steve Trevor much older and cut off the possibility of a romantic relationship with him. He paired her up with Etta Candy. And so Wonder Woman didn't have a romantic life. And so her primary existence was spiritual. She was kind of an eco-feminist. She was like loving one human family, all of us sharing this planet together. Instead of Aphrodite, she was fighting for the way of Gaia. And there was always something missing. Like that love story was missing from that era, I thought. And they tried to put in a couple of lovers, and it never quite felt right. Because she always seemed kind of like a little girl, this kind of pre-sexual thing. And she's Wonder Woman, she's not Wonder Girl, and I think having sexuality, having love is just a really important expression. I think it's better for storytelling, and I think it gives you lots of opportunities to subvert the Prince Charming narrative and to turn that around. And the way they're doing that in the comics now, if you're reading the Greg Rucka run, it's just outstanding, where the explanation is, we don't have the explanation yet, but something about the fates of Diana and Steve are intertwined, and it's not just about, there's a reason for their connection. I can't wait to find out what it is.
Hey there. So one of the facets of Marston's work that I found really interesting when you were talking was how Wonder Woman would help other women kind of, loosen the chains and help them to kind of deprogram so they can be themselves. But then it seems like that's lost, or, it doesn't seem like that is a facet of the Wonder Woman story that anyone else is telling. And when you were closing and you talked about the feminists who turn their backs, and I know that I've experienced other women telling me that I'm above, getting above my station and acting like a man, and that's not the right thing to do. And yeah, it's like that's the worst, I think, is when women take up that kind of attitude. And I'm just wondering if in your experience you've seen that facet explored outside of Marston, or did it just kind of, unfortunately, because that felt like such a winning component, that it wasn't just about, living the, being the hero, but it was about helping those other women to lift themselves up.
Right before we started the presentation, I took a slide out. And one of the things that in those Marston stories, one of the lines you hear from Wonder Woman when she encounters these women who are enslaved, beaten down, whatever's going on, she says, "Tell me your story." And then you get a couple of pages of how this woman arrived in her situation. It was very specific, very on point. And I think your question is just incredibly astute. And no, in fact, I think there were a couple of attempts by George Perez in the 80s. There were two characters, two just tear-jerking comic books for the time. The women in the stories were named Mindy Mayer, and the other one was a teenager, Lucy Spears. And they both died. And Wonder Woman, rather than be able to help them, she was there as an inspiration, but she wasn't there one-on-one, having an interaction. She never said, "Tell me your story." That never happened. And now Greg Rucka has taken up that mantle again. There's actually a story underway right now. But no, I think that's been missing forever. It didn't happen in the movie, except to the degree, and this is, again, film shorthand, credit where it's due, where, spoiler alert, where they're in the trenches, and it's no longer about the big picture of the war. It's about these individual people, and it's a woman and a child who get her attention. And she says, no more. Your way sucks, we're doing it my way. And that's the closest we really get. And God, I love that. I thank you for that question. I'm gonna dig more. We could do a whole show on just that. Other questions?
So how closely are you observing the reactions that people are having to the movie, and how is that informing the work that you're doing with this project?
Anybody have a Google alert set up for Wonder Woman? There used to be like 10 a month, and now there are like 150 a day. So I'm following it really, really, really closely. I actually haven't written my own review because I just keep getting obsessed with other people's reviews. It's really changed the state. It's really changed the whole shape of the conversation about Wonder Woman and about feminism in general. And I want to pull that back to talking about women not standing for other women. That when Wonder Woman showed up in 1941, and what this was really about is this woman shows up as a beacon for this movement that's already underway. And then in the 1970s, she shows up and she's this beacon for a movement that is already underway. Now she's showing up and we're in the resistance. This is a different conversation. Misogyny has been constellated in this individual that the whole world is reacting to. And Wonder Woman has taken on this kind of, I mean, she's bigger than life to begin with, but somehow she is resonating so deeply with people, and in ways that I didn't know. There's a great Medium article from the son of Baldwin, and he's looking at the Wonder Woman movie from the point of view, it's a conversation between him and another woman, and they are looking at the movie and deconstructing it from the point of view of people of color. Concepts, points of view that I simply had not known were there. And so I'm really, really listening, because I have felt like an authority on this topic, because I do nothing else with my time. But Wonder Woman means different things to different people, and so I'm really, really listening to that. And moving forward, this talk and this series of talks as I move through the next few months will probably be the end of this form, this sort of historical account, because I really want to look now at where we go from here. Because there's another thing that needs to happen right now, and something along the lines of being worthy of this archetype that has emerged at this time. Because historically, there's a backlash. Historically, World War II ends and there is a patriarchal need to reset the status quo and for women to go back into the home. In the 1980s, the sort of grassroots Christianity came up, and you start getting words like feminazi. And feminism becomes this bad word. And there's a backlash, and it goes back underground, and it was hard fought. We forget generation to generation. Something feels different this time. I don't know what it is, but it has something to do with being on the resistant side of things. We know these things can be taken away. And so the conversation I really want to be having is, how do we take this fight and actually do something creative with it? How do we take these feminist principles and feminism, because that word feminazi caught hold, and because feminism has taken all these different shapes, and there's one version of feminism that sort of mimics patriarchal concepts. We'll call it top-down feminism. I'm a better feminist than you are. And I'm going to do the guy thing here, and I'm going to speak about feminism. So bear with me, and you can beat me later if you want. But I really see feminism as being this grassroots, earth-sourced energy of organization, of family, of something that really is bringing together, creating communities, building families, building alliances, building coalitions based on commonality and on shared values, and that it is in constant stress with that top-down instinct. And the work is really about how do we use more inducement and less dominance? How do we get people invested in the future we want to live in, and not saying the future needs to be my way? We're building this thing together. The other way doesn't work. We tried it. It doesn't work. Or it works up to a point, and then you have too many people.
So you mentioned the resistance. So less than a year ago, it could have gone so the movie was presumably already in progress. Mm-hmm. It could have gone the other way with the election, right? We could be in the throes of first woman president of the USA.
Yeah.
How do you think, do you think about how Wonder Woman would be in that scenario? Do you think it would be really different? Or do you think that the underlying, that whoever's at the top and whatever their little agendas are, that the underlying issues and the inequalities that are still there, that would still be there if Hillary had won, would lead us into still seeing her as resistance, as the resistance?
It's such a good question. And I thought that's where it was going. Yeah, the movie was underway. We were talking about oh my God, 2017 is going to be the year of women, and we are going to have the first woman president, and Wonder Woman's going to be in the theaters. Nicholas Scott is going to be drawing Wonder Woman. Oh, happy days! And then I was in mourning for a week. And at least the movie was still coming out. And I don't know. I think that if it had gone the other way, crystal ball, alternate universe, if it had gone the other way, we would be in this place of celebration. Isn't it cool that we have a movie and Hillary Clinton and blah, blah, blah? But there would be this other thing constellating. There would be this other energy that is very, very old and very, very primal that would be fighting against this feminist wave. I think the energy that would have been constellated around Hillary Clinton is now constellated around the movie. And it would have been divided, it would have been really cool, but we wouldn't have that same, there's a little bit of, in me, just from my own experience, there's a little bit of, oh shit, that thing, it was supposed to go that way and it went terribly wrong. What's wrong? It's supposed to be going differently. And at least there's a fantasy story in front of the entire world showing a different version. And when I see little girls, it would have been great to see you can be the president of the United States when you grow up. And that's really cool. But there's something in my mind even cooler, even more powerful about getting the fantasy of a world where all you see as a little girl is a world of powerful women. That's something to live into that might have lost some of its juice if we were watching Hillary Clinton battle on all fronts and playing the patriarchal game. Because she would still be a woman functioning in a patriarchal system, which was the thing that seemed to me to be the thing that made a lot of us uneasy, that I couldn't quite put my finger on, and it just bugged me. And this starts to reimagine things. So that's how it might have gone. I don't know. But yeah.
Hello? Okay. Sort of a two-parter, but one, you caught my eye with the Grant Morrison comic that came out last year called Earthworm. Mm-hmm. She said she's actually a lesbian in it, not just hints at it. Mm-hmm. So one is, how was that received? And have you read it? Was it good? The second part is, So what I've noticed, because I'm not a huge comic book reader, but I noticed that a lot of these movies have sequels. So I was wondering, as someone who follows it so closely, what maybe we could expect, or if you're gonna start a petition that we could sign to sway in the direction that we want. And those are my questions.
Oh man. You know, my dream out of this whole thing, like if I could, if somehow this talk caught Patty Jenkins' attention and I could sit down with Patty Jenkins and talk Wonder Woman, that would be so cool! Wonder Woman has made unbelievable money at the box office. So I'm going to do your questions backwards. So yeah, the sequel's coming. It had not been greenlit. The success of Wonder Woman has completely confounded Warner Brothers. They had not signed Patty Jenkins to a sequel, so she's going to basically get to write her own check for it. She has gone on record saying she wants to do a modern day story. Does that mean that's going to happen? No, but that's what I would imagine, is that we're going to see a present day depiction of Wonder Woman without the superheroes. If I had my way, like my own thing would actually be a sword and sorcery movie. I want to see her go battle, you know, mythic monsters in the fields as she takes on Doom's doorway to go rescue the soul of her love, Steve Trevor, who's being held in a golden cage somewhere in the underworld. Not that I've given this any thought. You can have that one for free. Yes, Earth 1 is great. Read it. It's beautifully drawn. They spent a year plus drawing it. It was a labor of love, and Grant Morrison is a special kind of weird genius. And he really, there are elements in the book that I don't like, and I'm not going to talk about them because I'd really rather talk about what I do like. Imagining the Amazons as a lesbian society and being really in your face and unapologetic about that, it's really radical. And the book is stunning, and it's the kind of book that you really need to read at least 3 or 4 times because it's just so layered. It is thematically so tight. Steve Trevor is re-envisioned as black, and that sort of puts this whole, and there's a really uncomfortable scene where apparently in their culture, now that she's saved his life, she's supposed to collar him. And you're going, if this were any other book, it would be horribly offensive, but it's not. It's incredibly poignant. Yeah, Wonder Woman Earth 1, absolutely worth your time.
So, the first thing I want to say is, I want to say thank you for putting me back in touch with my child comic book geek self that I have practically not even thought of in so many years. And I saw the first edition of Ms. Magazine, and I was like, that's why I subscribed to that magazine in the first place. And I wanna admit to everyone here that my very first published work was, me and George R.R. Martin, was a letter to the editor in a comic book. I was 9 years old. Someday maybe I'll even find that thing again, although I don't know if I'll be able to afford it. But
which comic book was it? Do you remember?
It was Superman. I was bitching about Lois Lane. They had rewritten her, and I didn't like it. I was like, fuck you people. So the 9-year-old from Cheshire, Oregon was like, you can't do that, assholes. So clearly I had read Little Wonder Woman already. What I wanted to say was, I'm really glad that you used, showed us and talked about the panel where she says, tell me your story. Because when you talk about top-down feminism, or whatever you want to call it, I mean, as a sex-positive feminist for a long time, I've had my share of dramas. And I feel like that's what's missing there. That there are many people, many women, that a particular kind of feminism doesn't want to hear the story of. And if you made that just a little bit bigger and cast a slightly bigger net, you'd have a culture that doesn't really give a shit about the stories of a lot of the people who make up that culture, as you clearly implied. And I just think that's hugely important. There's all the important stuff about, you know, the feminist through line, the alt relational through line, all the pieces, all the, you know, the pacifism, all those pieces. But I think the idea that everybody's story counts is one of the things that she gives us. And I hadn't had that in, like, put those together in so many words. I'm so grateful that you did that.
Thank you for that feedback. I will make sure, I'll put that slide back in tonight. I agree with you. I also want to be respectful of everybody. I just noticed the clock in the back of the room. I'm having such a good time, and I did say this would end at 8:30, and it's 9 o'clock. I'll stay all night. but I just wanted to acknowledge the time for people who may have made other commitments. So that said, any other questions, comments, snide remarks?
What did you think of the depiction of Etta Candy in the movie, and how as they have portrayed her through the years?
Oh, I love Etta Candy. I love Marston's Etta Candy. She's a big girl. She is unapologetic about it. And where Wonder Woman says, "Great Hera, great Aphrodite," Etta Candy says, "I will do anything for you except give up candy." Candy is her god, candy is her thing, and she does not give a rat's ass if you like it or not. And then Etta Candy just kind of disappeared for decades. And the first time I think she kind of popped back as something meaningful was when Gail Simone wrote her as a sassy military woman, a fiery redhead, but now she's fit. I didn't much like that. It felt dishonest. And it sort of points out this thing that Etta Candy brings, that beauty comes in all sizes. Etta knew she was beautiful. She was, she was Wonder Woman. She was another face of Wonder Woman who never doubted herself. And I thought that was a great, great model. And even Wonder Woman was saying, "Etta, you should lose some weight." And Etta's like, "Eh." And I really loved that. And so now this newest version of Etta, she is Etta's black. She's tough as nails. She's in a relationship with another woman. She's a really, really fun character who is deeply loyal and compassionate and very specific in her relationships. I think, and in the movie, all I see is a missed opportunity with her. Lucy Davis, is that right? Lucy Davis just knocked it out of the park in her 3 lines. And when she's leaving at the end of the movie, we see her walking off with Diana, and the presumption is this is the beginning of Etta guiding her through man's world, and I want to know that story. I would have traded Steve Trevor for Etta Candy in that movie, except for the nude scene. I want to keep the nude scene. Spoiler alert. Sorry, I did that backwards. Sequel. Yeah.
Boston, I just want to say you're amazing. Thank you for your life's work to get us to be here perfectly, to help us uncover all of the things that you're doing, these critical, important truths that we need to help us shift to the next reality. I just so appreciate everything. And I want to know what you're doing next. What's next for you? Where are you speaking? Where can we find you? Where can we learn more?
Well, I will speak anywhere that will happen. I am hoping to be at the Battery later this year. I am hoping to, I don't want to say the other one that I'm really, really hoping for, but we'll see how that comes out. I would like to speak at the LGBT Center. But what I really want to do in the next few topics, I want to start steering this again away from the history, because I'm writing a book, so this content is going into a book that'll be out later this year called Kink. It's called Kink and the Golden Lasso, and I will, and then when it's done, the next place to go is really into the personal development conversation. I really want to look at individual empowerment, group empowerment, and I want to look at how groups like Landmark Education are really working to create intentional, conscious community and empowering individuals and creating people to hold one another accountable. A co-ed paradise island, tough as nails, effective people. Yeah, I want to look more at the psychology and less at the comics. I've done a lot of this. Yeah, we'll see where the next speaking spot emerges. And I'll let you know. What's that?
He will soon.
Ryan's on that.
You spoke a little bit about how Wonder Woman reforms a lot of her villains that she's paired up against, and talked about Paula and Dr. Poison. What about some of the other rogues galleries? I mean, comic books heroes are always, always as good as their cast of villains, and who are some of her most notables?
So under Marston, the big one was the cheetah. The cheetah is her most recognizable longtime foe, which gets a little tricky when you're dealing with someone with god level power. Ares has always been the prime foe that everybody else exists under. Circe, the witch from Aeea from the Odyssey, shows up. She's a particularly good foil because if Wonder Woman is representing unity between the genders, then Circe is representing discordance between the genders, and so they have these sort of opposite views. Beyond the comics, nobody else has really emerged. It's Giganta was on the Super Friends. Under Marston, so there's Dr. Poison, which nobody heard from for 65 years, and then she had a couple comics, and then she's in the movie. I think Wonder Woman works best when she's fighting real-world situations. I think Wonder Woman functions really well in eras where she's fighting terrorist organizations. That was a big thing in the 80s.
New Frontiers was a great.
New Frontiers is amazing. Yes. When you're fighting against a concept. For people who don't know, the New Frontier.
Gorgeous.
Remind me the author's name. I'm blanking.
I can't think of the name off the top of my head.
He's super important, and he died recently. And he envisioned Wonder Woman as being taller than Superman. And this was something that they thought about in editorial. Oh, she can't be taller than Superman. And there's this moment where she's sitting down and they're having this fight, and she gets up, she towers over him, and she says, "There's the door, spaceman." Great moment. And then there's a spot later where or in another scene where the battle's been fought and won, and she's speaking to the world about equality, and she's rallying the folks, and a congressman says, "That's enough here, now sit down." And you just kind of get these two really great flavors of Wonder Woman. But Wonder Woman in that one has freed women in Vietnam who have been kept for soldiers to use, she says. And so she arms them and gives them guns and says, "Take revenge on the people who did this to you, and here's your dignity back." I don't love that portrayal of Wonder Woman because I don't love her using guns or encouraging other people to. I like when she ties people in ropes. But that's just me. I think through a different lens, I think it's a really, really great story. And let's see, any last burning questions?
you touched on this a little bit earlier, but I was hoping you might be able to expand a little bit on how Wonder Woman has personally impacted you most as a queer person. If you had to boil it down to one small little thing or one small concept, maybe a couple, but what do you feel like is the most important value that you've taken from her that you've applied to your own life that's made it better?
Leave it to the journalist.
So when most of the time, I'm from Pauls Valley, Oklahoma. and there were so many things about me that were strange, and it was, and I just didn't fit in. But there was a thing in Wonder Woman that just had me say, it's not you. You're not broken. The world is. Something's wrong out there, and they're not right, and don't let it in. Don't believe it. And I forget. It's really easy to forget. But when I finally get still, after I've spun out and pissed off, and I just feel like it's all so unfair, which is really, oh my God, I feel like I'm not enough. Or on the other end of that, what's going to happen to me later tonight is, who the hell are you? Who the hell do you think you are to say all these things? To go, I am a divine child of the universe. I belong here, and if you don't understand me, it's not your job to understand me. It's my job to show up. And that's what Wonder Woman does. And she shows up with compassion and respect and human kindness. And that's what I strive for. Even when I'm failing, that's what I want to be. And I just keep going back to that again and again and again. Anyways, thank you so much for coming out to celebrate Wonder Woman. I really appreciate your attention. Sitting down for 2 hours and listening to me go on about a comic book is ridiculous. And I cannot thank you enough. So please go out there, have fun. If you've already seen the movie, see it again. And go out and be good to each other. And if you want, I'm on Twitter at Boston Blake. Find me on Facebook. And hopefully there'll be more soon. Yay! Ta-da!